Hey guys, Poncho Bandit here. Today I have something special for you. We're going to talk about cannons.
This is Observer 1 Alpha. Call for fire to follow. Warno. Fire for effect at grid November Bravo. 4 tree 2 7 8 9er. Altitude
We got their entire backline still. Let's go,
Yep,
dude.
let's go.
Fire for effect.
I'm going to put together a cannon tutorial for you guys. This guide is intended to give a basic and intermediate introduction to cannon team procedures and tactics. My personal background, I've been a cannon main ever since cannons were introduced into Node Wars. I never thought of myself as a very good PvPer, and I always wanted to contribute just a little bit more to the guild to help out during Node Wars. And I think cannons are a great way to do that. This isn't an all-inclusive guide, so if you guys have helpful tips or hints, please put them in the comments below. I'm going to break this guide down into 4 different sections. First, we'll talk about just the capabilities of what a cannon can do. Second, we're going to look at how to place and actually use the cannon. Third, we'll go over some general loading and firing protocols. And fourth, some spotting protocols and techniques that your flex team members can use to help guide you onto target even better. In Node Wars, quality cannon teams are a rare commodity. A well-coordinated flex and cannon team can completely strip an enemy's base in just a matter of minutes. Cannons are a hard counter to an enemy force that is turtling behind their defensive structures. Cannons have a max effective range of about 360 in-game meters. For reference, the average render distance without costume buffs is about 40 meters. In order to place a cannon, you need to have a cannon observatory built. Yeah, it's a little closer. And you can only place one cannon for each observatory. It must be within Node War boundaries, and it cannot be within a safe zone, although you can roll your cannon into safe zones for some cheese tactics. So there are 2 types of cannonballs, steel and flame. Regular cannonballs have a massive AoE knockdown effect and deal a significant amount of damage to players. The effective AoE is actually much larger than the visible explosion animation, and it's not uncommon to get a handful of kills from cannons, at least in T1 Node Wars. And this is especially true if you can synchronize your shots based upon attacking ground forces assaulting an enemy base. Because of the large AoE, it's also not uncommon that all of the structures in a tightly built base can be damaged by a single cannon volley. Steel cannonballs deal approximately 15% of the total HP to all defensive structure turrets. That's about 7 rounds total to destroy an enemy flame tower or Halacha. However, cannons don't really do any damage at all to sticks or forts.
That's not Gore getting cannoned now.
Okay.
Suction on the tower.
One last little pro tip: when knocked down by an enemy cannonball, your feet will point directly at the cannon, so you can use that tactic to aid in anti-cannon support. So once you've stripped an enemy base with about 7 cannonballs, if you're doing things right, your job is to keep it that way. And a great way to do that is with the second type of cannonball, the flame shot. These also have very large AoE effects, but they don't deal any significant damage to structure. But they do create a lingering damage over time effect that stops players from going out of combat to place traps, structures, and repair their fort. This effectively prevents the enemy from rebuilding. This damage over time effect lasts for about a minute unless extinguished with water. If you do not craft your own cannonballs, you can buy them from the community marketplace. It's important to note that the guild vendor versions of these cannonballs do considerably less damage, so you shouldn't use them unless it's an absolutely last resort. Crafting your own cannonballs is pretty simple. You'll need to own and use a Siege workshop. Here's a picture of my setup in Heidel, and you simply make sure that you have the required ingredients within that town storage to craft your own. So recent Global Lab updates have teased the idea of introducing special cannonballs, which are augmented with boss auras. Those are the auras that come in drops from bosses like Karanda, Nuver, Zarka. And these have various supplemental effects which could change the meta and could become very powerful. So make sure to keep an eye out for those in patch notes. So before we start with the basics of placement and operation procedures, If you're at least a rank of quartermaster or cannoneer within your guild and you have an allowance, you should grab a few practice cannons and a bunch of practice cannonballs from the guild vendor. He's available in most large cities. This will allow you to practice cannoning outside of Node Wars. So you can grab a spotter buddy and a couple other friends, and you can follow along with the rest of this guide. Since cannons are a valuable resource, and they take about 5 minutes to create from inside a cannon observatory, you should carefully consider your potential firing positions, as a premature loss of cannon can put you at a big disadvantage. So here are a few things to consider: the distance to the target, the defendability of the position, and the local terrain around that firing position, the relative height difference between your cannon and the target, and any occlusive structures that might be in the way, things like gates, walls, hills, and mountains. Also, you might want to consider enemy assets, like their flex team composition, whether they have Pegasus or Doom horses, as these things might make cannon operations much more difficult. While any class is capable of becoming a high-quality cannoneer, it should become apparent by now that classes with double or triple jump or flying capabilities like Ninja, Kuno, Tamer, and Lan are highly sought after for this role. Now, this also applies for hunting down enemy cannons as well. So once you find a suitable firing position, before you even deploy the cannon, you should start the process of deploying stun and flame traps. Stun traps will CC enemies on foot, while flame traps will dismount enemy cavalry. Second, you will want to communicate your intentions with the rest of your flex team. Because cannons are such an important asset in flex teams, the rest of your team should be revolving their actions around you. You are now the most important player on the battlefield with the most important asset. During your communication to the flex team, you should indicate a couple of things. 1, which enemy fort are you planning to attack? 2, your relative location from that enemy base. And 3, any other local conditions that might be helpful to the rest of your team. Like, for instance, if you have a really good position, you can let them know, hey, I don't think I'll need help defending this cannon. Go do something else. So these verbal communications are critical to developing high-level flex team gameplay. It also helps alert your spotters to start getting ready to give you shot corrections. And I'll have more on that in later sections to follow. So once you're in a firing position and you're ready to go, you're going to deploy the cannon from your backpack. It'll take a couple of seconds to load, and then you're going to need to find your range to the target. This is one of the more difficult things to do. You're going to open your map, make sure that the Node War selection map is clicked. That's the upper right-hand corner with the crossed swords. That'll load the nodes. And you can right-click anywhere on the map to create a visible waypoint. This waypoint also comes with a built-in range feature that's shown in-game near your character's feet. So we aren't quite done yet. To find the exact dope on the scope or the firing parameters that you're going to be using, you'll need to either Alt-Tab or have a second monitor available to pull up the cannon angle spreadsheet to calculate your final firing parameters. I put a link down to this spreadsheet in the comments below. When you pull it up, you're going to see a bunch of numbers and a bunch of settings. Along the top row in black is going to be the linear distance that you've just found using your minimap and heads-up display. Below that are the different firing solutions. Each of these firing parameters has an angle and a power setting. There are 7 different firing angles, and these are listed from 0 to 6. To adjust these angles, you have to hold down Shift while you're on the gun and either press or tap W or S. Every time you fire a shot and reload, this angle gets reset back to 0. The second number next to the angle is going to be the power setting. This power setting is what you're going to aim for. Once you have your angle set, you're going to hold left click to charge the cannon, and you're going to be aiming for that charge level. A common misconception about these charge levels is that they're an analog system when they're actually not. They are ranges of values in sets of 10, meaning that a charge of 51 is going to hit the exact same location as a charge of 59. So by choosing the values in the middle of that range, you give yourself a little bit of buffer room for human error and lag. Also, if you've got some crazy UI setup, you might need to move some of your UI elements, specifically if you have stuff at the bottom of your screen, as that is where the charge indicator is going to show up. Also notable, there are multiple firing solutions available for each distance. Typically, you should pick the highest angle solution, as these are the most accurate and they help negate some of the relative differences in elevation between the target and the cannon. Additionally, they can allow you the steepest trajectory to clear any potential objects that might be occluding the cannonball flight path, such as hills or gates. However, some of the lowest angles will also provide shortest flight times, as the cannonball will get there faster. The last and final part of finalizing your firing solution for the cannon is the most difficult, and this is adjusting for large differences in elevation. Fortunately, I have a really good rule of thumb that has worked for me so far. And that is, for every fort height that you are above or below the target, you need to add or subtract 10 meters from the linear distance. So in this example, I have looked at my minimap and I found that I am 180 meters in linear distance. However, I have to account for the fact that I'm nearly 2 full fort heights taller, higher than the enemy target. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to decrease my linear distance by 20. So if I pull up the actual cannon angle chart, I can see that my linear distance is 180. But if I shot at those firing solutions, I'd overshoot the target by a lot. What I want to do, and by decreasing 20, I want to use one of these firing solutions. Further, usually the highest angle possible is the best solution. By now you've probably realized that you can mount the cannon by pressing R when you're standing next to it. Also important to note is that the remove cannon icon, which is only available in real cannons during Node Wars, doesn't actually destroy the cannon, it just puts it back into your inventory. So this is really helpful if you need to reposition over very long distances. You just need to make sure that your cannon observatory isn't under threat of being destroyed, because then you won't be able to replace it at all. The protocols for loading are pretty straightforward, but you should note that once you load ammo into the cannon, you cannot remove that ammo. Additionally, the ammo will be consumed in the order that it's shown in the inventory when you put it in. So you can't really change ammo types halfway through. Alternatively, you can leave this inventory screen open and you can add cannonballs one by one after each shot if you need that level of control. So in this section, I'll go over the firing protocols that I've created with my Flex team, which are based off of real-world military tactics that emphasize verbal callouts and communication to improve the cannon's effectiveness. Once you have your cannon loaded, positioned, angled appropriately, and you've released the left mouse button at the desired power, at this point, the cannoneer should make a verbal callout. We use the phrase shot out. Shot out, indicating a round has left the cannon, and nearby Flex members should start to look out and stand by for spotting and correction.
I'm at their base.
The typical flight time is about 10 to 15 seconds, depending on your trajectory and distance. During the flight of the cannonball, the cannoneer should visually track the ball as closely as possible and attempt to predict when the cannon impacts the ground, making a second verbal call out, splash. 3, 2, 1, splash, indicating the cannonball should have impacted the ground. These verbal callouts should override any other verbal communications going on. Because of the time-critical nature of cannon operations, the vulnerability to counterattack, and the reliance on others to make corrections, these voice calls are the highest priority call that you can make in your team Discord. So sometimes you just need to use your big boy voice and talk the fuck up. After firing, a reload animation will lock you into place for about 15 seconds before you fire again. During this time, you should be receiving feedback and corrections based off of your previous shot. You need to use this time to recalculate a firing solution if needed. If you're attacked while operating a cannon, it's nearly always a better option to stay on the gun, continuing your fire mission, and make a verbal call for your other Flex members to help you out. Normal enemy attacks do very little damage, but any level of BSR skill will knock you off the cannon. And also, Doom Horses will pretty much one-shot you. The last section of this guide, arguably the most important, doesn't even involve the cannon or cannoneer, but the spotter or forward observer that's directing incoming fire towards enemy structures. A good spotter can be any class, but Ninja, Kuno, Musa, Meiwa generally have the most utility with this role. Sometimes even taking one for the team and suiciding and being in observation mode is the best tactic. A good spotter should be able to communicate well with clear, concise feedback, as the effectiveness of the entire team relies upon them. The roles of a spotter are as follows. 1. Know where the friendly cannon is located at all times. Use cardinal directions from the enemy base to orient yourself. 2. Listen for verbal cues from the gunner.
Shot out.
Shot out. We use the term shot out and splash. Shot out meaning that the cannonball has been fired, and you have roughly 10 to 15 seconds to get into place so you can observe the splash. 3, 2, 1, splash. Splash is when the gunner anticipates that the cannonball hits the ground. The flight times of each shot may differ depending upon the distance to the target, the angle, and the trajectory that the gunner is using. Sometimes it can be very difficult to see because of trees and other terrain features. 3. Give corrections based on the gunner's perspective, not your own. The gunner's the one who has to make the changes to the firing solution, so you need to make the corrections as unambiguous as possible.
Splash coming in 3, 2, 1.
Drop 10.
Drop 10. Okay.
Terms that are clear and concise should be used. To indicate left or right, just say left or right and the amount. Same thing for forward and backwards. Add and drop can be useful. If you don't see an explosion or a cannonball, don't guess. Let the gunner know exactly what you see. If it's nothing, tell them I have no idea what you shot. Likely, sometimes the gunner has made a mistake or an error in calculating the trajectory, and he just needs to try again and send another round.
Shot out. Splash coming in 3, 2, 1.
Good hit.
Roger, thank you.
And 4, you need to paint a picture of the battle space. In between cannon shots, this is a good time for the spotter to paint the picture of the enemy base by letting him know exactly which structures are being hit. 3, 2, 1, splash. Sleepy Alkalish, are you? Are you going to be there soon?
Yeah, that's good. You're hitting Flamer. After you kill that one, it's like 70% health. After you kill that one, 10 to your right and 5 more. That should be good.
10 to my right and add 5 to hit the second?
Yep.
Roger.
Yep. Alright, last splash was good. Flame Tower 1 is 5%. To hit the next Flame Tower, left 20, add 20.
Including things like the HP of these structures is also useful. This will help the cannoneer adjust their shots for subsequent targets, especially if that spotter dies, or if offense or defense teams need that information. Lastly, it's important to note a few things. Cannonballs have a massive AoE, like really big. Most bases have all of their structures within 15 to 20 meters. The cannonball's AoE is easily bigger than that. So most times if you're sending cannonballs at a base and hitting the middle of the stick, you're probably hitting all of the structures that you can damage. But being able to micromanage and adjust those shots is what makes really good cannon teams. And the last thing is sometimes the damage ticks on the cannonballs can be very delayed. So if you don't see a turret's HP drop, just give it a second, could just be lag or desync. So that's all I got for you. Now it's time to get out there and practice. Cannons are only as effective as their spotters and fellow Flex team members, with communication and preparation being the most important attributes. If you enjoyed this tutorial, let me know by leaving a comment, liking, and subscribing. Special shout out to Clan Wolf, aka Sleepy, and Utog for their help creating this guide. Thanks for watching.
Shot out. Splash coming in 3, 2, 1.
Dead on.
Nice. That was pretty cool.